This is The Chris Berry Show. Expert information on elder law, retirement, and estate planning. Information that you can understand. Here's your host, Chris Berry.
And welcome to The Chris Berry Show, where we talk wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. And each week on The Chris Berry Show, we like to start off with a positive focus, something positive that happened from the previous week. We think it starts the show off on a good foot. It's something that I do with my family. When we sit down with dinner, we share something positive that happened during the day. And it's great hearing the answers going around the table. So for me, this week, positive focus was that my family and my children, my two young children, Ryan, who's age 8, and my daughter Madison, age 5, we went to see a concert. We went to see Pentatonics, which it's not really my cup of tea per se, but the kids love the show. And if you're not familiar with them, they're, I guess, a cappella group mostly, where they each kind of have a different role that they play. But they do covers of like other bands, and they have some of their own original shows as well, or original songs as well. And so it was interesting and great to attend that concert. It was great for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was the first time taking the kids to see a big concert like that. We went to Pine Knob. I'm always going to call it Pine Knob, even though now it's called DTE. So it was their first big outdoor concert. And it was great seeing their excitement in their eyes. I got them little glow stick things to put around their necks so I could spot them in the dark. Not that I let them really very far from me. But it was great to see the joy they had. And my daughter Madison, she was dancing throughout the whole show, and my son Ryan was enjoying it as well. So it was great to spend time with family and great to see a great concert. And while I was there, it had me thinking that the different members of Pentatonics, they really have to work together as part of a team. And it kind of reminded me of what our goal at our firm is really to put together a holistic plan for our clients, where we have all these different pieces of the puzzle fitting together. Both the legal, the financial, the insurance, the investments, the tax planning, making sure all these pieces of the puzzle fit together, because too often we find that they don't. So it'd be, for example, if one of the singers was singing out of tune, maybe the tax guy isn't on board with what the financial planner is recommending. So a lot of times our goal is to kind of oversee this type of thing. And it really kind of hit home as I was watching Pentatonics is that's the role that we serve for our clients, is we're overseeing all these different pieces of the puzzle. It's kind of like a orchestra. And my role would be that of a conductor, making sure all of the pieces are playing nice together. And so I thought that's what we'd spend some time talking about in this first segment of the Chris Berry Show this week, is just the value of a holistic plan. And that's really what we talk about on the Chris Berry Show, is we talk about wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. And we're going to talk about the value of having a good plan where all of the pieces fit together. All of the harmonies are going, are all in tune. You're hitting the right beats at the right time, hitting the dance moves at the right time if you're watching the Pentatonics show. So that's what we're going to do in our first segment. And then the second segment, we're going to get into some of the planning errors. So estates and financial plan, things to think about, whether your estate or financial plan is in order. So that'll be the second segment of the Chris Berry Show today. And then in the third segment, we're going to get into some questions and answers from our listeners, or maybe a question that popped up during the week as I was working with my clients. And if you do have any questions, feel free to email those questions at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com. Or you can go online to thechrisberryshow.com, where there's a spot where you can contact us and ask a question directly there. Or give us a call anytime at 810-355-2584 if you do have any questions, because we always love to hear from our listeners, so please do ask us a question. And so before I get into talking about the value of that holistic plan, I just wanted to share some exciting other news as we're wrapping up our fundraising efforts for the Alzheimer's Association. The Alzheimer's Walk, or the Walk to End Alzheimer's, is going to be September 29th in Brighton. So if you're in the area, we'd love to have you join. You can register for the walk by clicking through at our website, at thechrisberryshow.com, or you can go directly to www.alzeldercare.com to either donate to the cause, and that is a tax-deductible, a charitable donation, or you can even join our team and walk with us September 29th. Our teams, so far, I think we're going to have about, I think we have almost 20 people on the team right now. So it should be a good group. Last year, there was about 800 walkers. This year, we're hoping to get over 1,000 walkers on that day. And again, we're trying to raise awareness and raise funds to help stomp out Alzheimer's. And we've had a couple previous episodes where we've talked to some important players in the Alzheimer's community. We've had Maggie Gibbons with Alzheimer's Association. Lauren shared her story, being a caregiver for her grandma, and then her advocacy work in D.C., which was exciting to hear. And we had Dr. Bruno, who's really kind of at the front of the edge in terms of research with regards to Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's and dementia, we feel it's something that affects people more often now because we're living longer than ever. So it's something that's very important as we're planning for the second half of life. So my request is, if you can, or if it's affected your family, or if you have a couple dollars to spare, maybe go to our donation website, alzeldercare.com, or you can click through at thechrisberryshow.com and just take a minute, even if it's the price of a coffee of a Starbucks. We'd love to have those donations because as a walk this year, we've just passed over $100,000 raised to go to the Alzheimer's Association. So we still have a lot of work to do, but actually just this week we passed over $100,000. So we're pretty excited about that. And that walk is coming up September 29th, and there's more information on our website. But we'd love to have you join, and if possible, if you could, maybe make a donation to help the cause, because we just passed over $100,000 totally raised for the walk as a walk, and we're I think right now in second place in terms of our team. Last couple of years, we've actually been in first place in terms of fundraising efforts. So we're a little bit behind, but we're in striking distance, and every little bit helps. So if you do want to donate to the cause, you can join the Elder Care Crew. That's the name of our team, and with a small donation, that would certainly help. So that's pretty exciting. We're looking forward to that. That's coming up in the near future, and that's why we've been doing a huge push in terms of information and education about the Alzheimer's Association. So now what I thought I'd do is just talk about the value of a holistic advisor. So like I said, we're at that Pentatonics concert, and I heard this a cappella group singing these amazing harmonies, and that just reminded me of that's really what our goal is when we talk about planning for the second half of life as it relates to wealth, estate, and tax planning. Because too often in the past, people had kind of different pieces of the puzzle, and they weren't necessarily fitting together well. For example, the ultra-wealthy, they have this concept called the family office. So think of the Goldman Sachs and Berkshire Hathaways of the world, and they provide holistic planning to high net worth people. People have 10, 20 million or more. And if you look back, the high net worth have always had access to holistic planning of an attorney, an advisor, or insurance, or investment, or a tax professional, all sitting at the table, collaborating on their behalf. But the middle class never really had that. And that's what the goal of as it comes to holistic planning. And that's why we're so passionate about bringing this education to the airwaves through this radio show or through our workshops that we have about once a week at one of our different locations throughout Metro Detroit. We're passionate about bringing this holistic planning to the middle class because this is the people we need who need it the most, the people who have historically been served by salespeople selling stocks or selling bonds or selling life insurance or selling annuities or selling trusts and wills or selling tax returns. They're all just selling products and services. They're not trying to tie it all together in one comprehensive, holistic plan. And that's really what we try to do at our firm, and that's what we're trying to do on the Chris Berry Show is help you understand the value of a holistic plan so that all of these pieces of the puzzle can fit together so that you can have a safe and happy retirement, as safe as possible, worry-free as possible by making sure all these pieces fit together. So I thought it would be helpful to just kind of touch on some of the pieces of that puzzle. So the first thing is with investments. We need to make sure that your investment plan is on point. Make sure that you have investments that match your volatility, because everyone has a different risk tolerance. And it might be different based on where you are in terms of your lifespan. So if you're just starting out, have your first job, have your first 401k, you might be a little more able to take on risk than someone who is nearing retirement or maybe already retired. So you need to make sure that your investments, whether it's your mutual funds or if you're looking at annuities or other type of investment vehicles, need to make sure that the investments match your volatility. Make sure that you're able to take on that risk. And so one of the ways that we help organize those investments or to understand the concept of risk is by using something we call a bucket plan, by understanding how are we going to utilize our money. Money we're going to need over the next year. So that might be our income needs for the next year if we're retired. If we're currently working, then you probably don't have much of income needs because you have your salary coming in. So you have your now bucket of money that has your income needs. And then you look at any planned expenses for the year. So do you have to get a new roof? Is there any big vacation that you're taking? You want to make sure you have that money set aside. It's safe, liquid, available in that now bucket of money. And then also your emergency fund. So that money that you want hidden away just in case there's some type of emergency. All of that money should be safe, liquid, and we call that now bucket of money. And then your later bucket of money is money that you're not going to necessarily need right away. So the goal here is that this is money that you're not going to touch in the near future. So if the market's going up or down, you're not too concerned about it because you're not going to touch that money. So especially during the accumulation phase as you're making money versus the distribution phase, we're not super concerned what the market's doing on a day-to-day basis because we're not going to need that money right away. And then we have our soon bucket. So we have that now bucket. That's the money that's available now. It's liquid. It's safe. Think of checking, savings, money market. Very low risk, very low return. Then that later bucket of money, that's money that's more geared towards growth. That would be money that you don't plan on using in the near future. And then we need to build in our soon bucket of money. And that soon bucket of money is the money that we're going to need sooner rather than later. So maybe we view this on a 10-year horizon, that we have our now bucket, and then that later bucket's 10 years from now. And that soon bucket is the money that you're going to need between now and the next 10 years. So money that we need sooner rather than later. And so if you're retired, this might be your income needs for the next 10 years. And you want to make sure that money's invested safer, maybe more conservatively than that later bucket of money. And then also we want to have some type of inflation hedge in there as well to make sure that if the cost of bread is always going up, I just saw a funny infographic that showed the cost of bacon back in 20 years ago versus now. And when you're talking bacon, that always interests me. I can't remember what exactly the numbers were, but it was a funny infographic. I'm going to have to pull it up. But we understand that inflation works and that the cost of bread or cost of bacon is always going up. So we want to make sure that we have some type of inflation hedge in that sooner bucket of money. So that's kind of how we look at investments, and we figure out the amount of risk that we're willing to take on in that soon bucket of money as well as that later bucket of money. And it might be different in those two buckets. And we have some handy software and questionnaire that we walk our clients through to help discover their volatility tolerance. But when you're looking at investments, that's a big piece of it. And then also taxes. That's a key component to any plan, is having a tax plan. And most people maybe do their tax preparation themselves using TurboTax or the H&R blocks, or you might even have a CPA. But too often when you're just looking at tax preparation, that's very different than tax planning, because there's some key decisions you can make with regards to your IRAs and even your timing of Social Security that falls into tax planning. And too often that part is overlooked. A lot of people have a good tax preparer, and we're certainly not looking to replace that, but you should take a look into tax planning, like managing when and how you're going to pay your taxes, specifically as it relates to your IRAs. For example, maybe we want to engage in some type of We call it bracket bumping or Roth conversions, especially from the time that you retire before you reach 70 and a half, when you have to start taking out required minimum distributions. Maybe now's the time to look at moving money from those IRAs to Roths, so that you're moving money from pre-tax to post-tax. Or maybe you're paying the income tax to move it into an asset protection trust to protect you against long-term care costs. So there is a tax aspect that goes into planning for the second half of life, planning for retirement or after retirement. And then insurance plays an important role of any plan as well, whether we're talking about life insurance or we're talking about long-term care insurance, or even property and casualty insurance, things like an umbrella policy. If you remember, we had Andrew, CEO, on probably about 5 episodes ago, and he was talking about umbrella policies and ways to lower your automobile insurance and homeowners insurance. Insurance is a part of any holistic plan. And then the next piece of it is, of course, the estate planning piece, having that legal plan in place. Whether it's a will or a trust or powers of attorney, we need to make sure that we have that legal structure in place. Maybe we're setting up an asset protection trust, a castle trust. But as you see, as I just kind of briefly go over these different aspects, they're all interrelated. Maybe as we look at retirement, we'd look at Social Security timing and delay that so that we can move money from the IRAs to move it into the asset protection trust. And maybe we look at asset-based long-term care to protect the rest of those IRAs. Just in that short little 10-second example, we touched on all 4 of those aspects. So holistic planning, it's a key piece of the puzzle. We think it's very important. So hopefully that was helpful. And on our next segment, we're going to get into just a quick checklist. Is your estate plan in order? Is your estate and financial plan in order? Join us after the break.
If you or a loved one is facing long-term care costs, make sure you talk with certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm. He can help you, like he did Keith Gerard's family. Here's Keith.
Basically, it's my in-laws. They're both 90 and they can't live on their own or anything, and they don't have enough money to go in assisted living. We went to Chris Berry to get the VA benefits, and he said, well, we can get almost $2,000 a month, which they can put towards assisted living. It was a big relief. Most lawyers are pretty sharp, but Chris, he knows exactly his business. And it's a shame that these vets have to go through all these processes. But I guess we need people like Chris to help us out. He made it so easy for us.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Get the governmental benefits you deserve. The Elder Care Firm is ready to help you. Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800.
And welcome back to the Chris Berry Show, where we talk wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. And in this segment, we're going to get into asking whether your estate and financial plan is in order. So just some things to think about as it relates to your estate and financial plan, because these are key pieces of that holistic plan for planning for the second half of life. And so maybe after this segment, you can take a look at your plan, think about it. Hopefully you have some type of plan. It's amazing how many people out there don't have any type of legal plan or any type of written financial plan. And you can't really get where you want to go without having some type of plan in place. So is your estate and financial plan in order? And there's a couple, planning errors that we need to avoid. Probably the biggest one would be procrastination. I can do it another day. Second would be a lack of a comprehensive estate, tax, financial, and retirement plan. I review a lot of plans, and they're not as comprehensive as they should be. Another issue is choosing the wrong fiduciary, so choosing the wrong people to serve that fiduciary role for you. Another big issue we see is asset titling and designation of beneficiaries, not having the right beneficiaries named. Next would be failing to plan for disability or long-term care. Too often people haven't answered the long-term care question. Next would be careful consideration of family dynamics. So every family is a little bit different, and you need to take that into account when you're putting together your plan. And then understanding that planning is an event, not a process. So let's start with procrastination. So it's very easy to put planning like this off. Like when we meet in our workshops that we do about once a week at one of our different locations, I always make the joke that we're going to talk about death, taxes, and incapacity. And like, who gets really excited about that? No one, right? It's not fun to think about. Most people have a fear of death, or they're uncomfortable talking about it, or aging, or long-term care. Or sometimes people misperceive the expense of planning, not understanding that not having a plan is typically more expensive than investing in a good financial or legal plan. Or sometimes it might be complicated family situations. Maybe you're not sure, maybe it's a second marriage and you're not sure how to plan for a spouse, as well as make sure that you include the children from the previous marriage. Or for a lot of our younger clients, one of the biggest hurdles for them if they have minor children would be, who would they name, or who should they name as a guardian to take over if something were to happen to them. So procrastination, it's a big piece of the puzzle of why people don't move forward with planning, or one of the biggest issues I see with the planning, it really is that procrastination. There's a lot of different reasons for it. Like I said, it might be the fear of death, that if they put their plan in place, then you're telling everyone that you're ready to go. I remember probably my first year of practice, one of my clients, we were working on putting together their legal estate plan, their wills, and their trusts. And we had met, and they're a great couple. They wanted to get their planning done. They're in their late 60s, maybe early 70s, because this was about 13 years ago. And they're sitting across from me, and we were designing the plan, and we designed this great estate plan. And then I told them, okay, it's going to take us some time to put everything together. And they said, okay, that's great. And then they basically disappeared. Like, I didn't hear from them for about 6 months, and I was worried. I didn't know what happened to them. And then finally the phone rang one day, and I picked it up, and they're like, hey, Chris, sorry, we're ready to come in and get everything taken care of. I was like, all right, great. Like, I'm not going anywhere, so I'm ready whenever you are. And so they finally came back in, and they signed their documents. And after everything was signed, I was like, hey, what happened to you guys? Kind of lost you for a bit there. And what they told me is they were afraid that once they signed that will or a trust, that something bad was going to happen. And I had to assure them that no, that's not how it works. It'd be much worse if we didn't have this in place and something did happen. So they're afraid that if they signed their estate planning documents, then it would be time for them to have to use them. And that's not how it works. We like to think of that estate plan kind of like as a parachute. You don't know necessarily when you're going to need it, but you want to make sure that you have it and there's no holes in it. So, like I said, procrastination, that's one of the biggest issues. So if you don't have a written financial plan, or if you don't have a will or a trust, or you haven't looked at any type of tax planning, or maybe you don't have insurance or haven't explored the insurance piece or the long-term care question of how you're going to answer that, the devastating cost of long-term care, don't procrastinate anymore. You never know when life's going to throw you a curveball. Heck, even Mother Nature is throwing a curveball right now with a hurricane. Things happen in life that are unplanned, and you need to have some type of plan in place. So the next issue that I see when we're reviewing financial and legal plans is lack of a comprehensive estate, tax, financial, and retirement plan. And this is kind of what we talked about in our previous segment. And often I see clients with multiple banks and investments and multiple retirement accounts. Things are all spread out, and there's no rhyme or reason. It's just stuff that they've collected throughout their lifetime. And it's important to understand that you might think of that as, well, if I have stuff spread out between different banks and different financial institutions, it's diversified. Well, in reality, that might be the opposite of diversification. Sure, you have all your eggs spread out, but most likely all those different accounts and those different investments aren't matching your volatility tolerance or the right asset allocation. A lot of times they're not funded correctly. If you do have a trust and they're not funded in the trust, and there's no real rhyme or reason. And it's important to have a plan that should be organized. Everything that you do from a financial planning or tax planning or estate planning perspective has to have some purpose. You shouldn't be going at this willy-nilly. So it's important that all these pieces fit together. For example, just look at Social Security optimization. It's a big issue when it comes to tax planning and as well as financial planning or even legal planning. Because the later you take Social Security, think of it as you get basically an 8% raise every year, assuming Social Security is still around, which is a whole new question. But all these pieces really fit together, and it should be reviewed on an annual basis. A comprehensive plan should review your estate plan and your banks and beneficiary designations, retirement accounts, insurance. Everything should be titled properly. So all these pieces need to fit together. And that's really what we talked about in that first segment, is just having a comprehensive, holistic plan that plans for the second half of life, making sure all the pieces of the puzzle fit together, just like pentatonics, make sure that harmony is in tune and everyone's hitting the right beats. Now, the next big issue I see is choosing the wrong fiduciary, or not knowing how to choose a fiduciary. So when we're talking about fiduciary, we're not talking about like your financial planner or attorney. What we're talking about is the people you've named in your documents. So who's going to be the trustee of your trust, the personal representative of your will? Who's going to be the financial or medical power of attorney? A lot of people get hung up on who they would name for these roles, and that can lead to procrastination a lot of times because they just don't have that perfect person. So typically what I do is I walk clients through a hierarchy of people you should look at as you're putting together your plan, your estate plan. And so the hierarchy starts out with family. So I always recommend that you look at family first. So nothing stronger than blood, whether it's a son, a daughter, a sibling, mother, father, cousin, just looking at family, someone that you can name that knows you and hopefully loves you because they're family, someone that you can trust. And then second after family, maybe look to close family friends. So maybe it's a college roommate or a family friend that's been part of your family for 20 years, or someone from church. Okay, those could be great people. So first family, if not family, then friends. And remember, these don't have to be, they don't have to be like financial planners or attorneys or CPAs. They don't have to be financial whizzes. They just have to be people that you trust, because they could always hire a CPA to help them out, or hire an attorney, or hire a financial advisor to help them out. So they don't have to be like whizzes with the market or a CPA or anything like that. Just have to be someone that you trust, and you trust their decision making. And if they have a gap in knowledge, that you can trust them to fill that gap with a professional. So again, we start with family to name for those personal representatives, the executors, the trustees, or the powers of attorney. If not family, then friends. So third would be professionals. So this might be your attorney, your CPA, someone like that. Typically, financial planners don't really serve that role. But you could always name an attorney or a CPA as a fiduciary, whether it's a personal representative, trustee, etc. Now you're getting into more pay. It's probably going to be a little more costly to hire them, but they are professional. You know they're going to do, hopefully, a good job. So family, friends, professionals. Then we get into trust companies. So there's some companies out there that are established just to be a trust company. Some financial institutions have a trust company arm, but there's some individual trust companies out there. One that I can think of off the top of my head, based out of Kalamazoo, I think they have a Birmingham office, Greenleaf Trust. Their role is that of a trust company. And some of the financial institutions have kind of trust companies behind them as well. So first we start with, in terms of choosing a fiduciary, we start with family and then friends. And then if not friends, then we get into professionals. If not professionals, trust companies. Next would be banks on my list. So if we've exhausted all of those options, you could always look at the big banks of the world, the Comerica's, the Bank of America. Now you're getting into high fees, high expenses, kind of a pain to work with. They're going to do a good job. They're going to be thorough, but they're going to be eating up a lot of that estate as they're doing that job. And a lot of times they have large minimums as well, so don't really recommend them, but that might be an option. But any one of those options, and keep in mind, you might not have a perfect answer, but whoever you come up with is going to be better than leaving it up to the last option. And the last option when choosing a fiduciary would be courts. So you're leaving it up to the courts to decide. And that's certainly what we want to try to avoid, because not only now do you have a fiduciary who maybe has no knowledge of who you are, but also you have the courts involved as well. So even more cost, more time consuming, more a pain in the butt. So that's our hierarchy for choosing a fiduciary. Hopefully that helps you avoid the procrastination of thinking about it by giving you a template or hierarchy to think about who you would name. And then if you've already set up a trust or a will, maybe just take a minute, think about who you've named as your fiduciary, your power of attorney, your personal representative, your trustee. The next big issue we see, and this one is huge, and this should be probably near the top if I was ranking biggest issues, would be asset titling and designation of beneficiaries. So this is one of the biggest things. A lot of people assume that a will kind of controls your assets when you pass away. In reality, it doesn't. All that a will does is gives instructions to the probate court on how to administer your estate. So you need to review how you have your assets titled, as well as who are the beneficiaries. So do you have a joint account? Well, if you pass away, it's probably going to go to the joint owner. Do you have a beneficiary designation on your IRA? If you pass away, it goes to the person you've named as a beneficiary of that IRA. If you have a checking account, have you thought about naming someone transfer on death? So the checks are in your name, the account is in your name, but when you pass away, it avoids probate and goes to whoever you named as that transfer on death or payable on death, TOD or POD. Banks recognize both, but they use different terminology. So it's either payable on death or transfer on death. It means the exact same thing, but banks just like to confuse us by having two names for it, apparently. And then also look at your deed. So a lot of times we'll do what we call a beneficiary designation on your real estate, on your home. We call this a ladybird deed. So it'd be in your name while you're alive, and then if you were to pass away, or when you pass away, because we haven't figured out a way around that, then it would end up going into, instead of going to probate, goes to whoever you've named as a beneficiary. So that ladybird deed is a way that we can avoid probate with the real estate. Now, the next issue is not taking into account long-term care or disability. And this is a big one. This probably should be up near the top too, just like the last one. But failing to plan for disability or long-term care, too often people just put their heads in the sand and think it's never going to happen to me, that I'm never going to get diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I'm never going to have get diagnosed with Parkinson's or suffer a stroke or need long-term care. I'm never going to set foot in a nursing home. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. The current stats out there say 1 in 2 people are going to set foot in a nursing home. 3 out of 4 are going to need some form of long-term care, whether it's home care, assisted living, or nursing home care. And it's a big one. Next, family dynamics. So you always need to take into account the family situation with regards to your financial and estate plan. Are you married? Is it a second marriage? Do you have children from a previous marriage? Are there siblings who don't get along? All of this needs to be considered when it comes to planning. And then probably the last issue I see is too often people think that planning is just an event, not a process. You need to understand that things change. Laws change, taxes change, assets change. Your planning will change, maybe your marriage and children and pre-retirement, post-retirement, long-term care. This should be your financial and legal plan should be reviewed every 3 to 5 years, as well as your tax planning. So all of this needs to be reviewed on a regular basis. So those are some of the things to think about. If I were to ask you the question, is your estate plan and financial plan in order? Hopefully those gave you some things to think about. Now take a minute or two and think about your financial and estate plan. Is it in order? Have you avoided the things that we talked about just now, the procrastination? Is everything titled properly? Have you chosen the wrong fiduciary? Have you not reviewed your plan recently? So all things to think about. So stick with us as in our next segment, we're going to get into some of those questions and answers. So our listeners have submitted some questions. We're going to get into a lot of those answers.
If you or a loved one is facing long-term care costs, make sure you talk with certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm, like Jennifer did from Howell.
This past summer, my mom had to transition into a nursing home. So we contacted Chris to help get things in order. I wanted the best. I wanted somebody who knew what they were doing. Chris was able to help save a lot of that money that my mom and dad both worked so hard for. I thought that everything would have to go to the nursing home, but it didn't. He was able to save us half of everything that would have gone if we hadn't contacted the elder care firm. And we're all happy about that. Don't go to the nursing home without contacting Chris first.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The elder care firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Protect your assets from probate, long-term care costs, the IRS, and get the governmental benefits you deserve. Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800. 810-214-3800.
And welcome back to the Chris Berry Show, where we talk wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. Now, in this segment, what we're going to do is we're going to get into some of the questions submitted by our listeners, and I'm going to take a swing at answering those. And if you do have questions, feel free to submit those questions, and we have 3 ways you can submit questions. You can call us at 810-355-2584. Leave us a question right there, and we'll answer it on the show, potentially. Or you can email us at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com. Or you can go right to our website, thechrisberryshow.com, and submit a question right there. Also, you can register for one of our upcoming workshops. So if you do want to ask your question live to a real live Chris Berry, then please think about attending one of our weekly workshops. And they are at usually one of our locations in Metro Detroit, whether it's Brighton, Livonia, Novi, or Bloomfield Hills. Typically, we do them about once a week. We had 2 workshops, I think, last week, one in Brighton, one in the Livonia area. So now let's dig into these questions, and it looks like a lot of them are related to Alzheimer's. So we've had a couple Alzheimer's guests on the Chris Berry Show, and you can go to thechrisberryshow.com if you want to listen to any of those past episodes where we had Maggie Gibbons from the Alzheimer's Association. Lauren Kovac shared her journey as a caregiver for her grandma, and then moving on to help really grow the walk to end Alzheimer's in Brighton, and then now her advocacy work in Washington, D.C. It was a great story, great episode, or a great show. And then recently we had Dr. Bruno, who's really spearheading a lot of the research that goes into Alzheimer's on one of our past shows. All of those were great shows. So I think a lot of these questions probably stemmed from our listeners listening to those. So let's get into this first one. This first one is from John. And John asks, can a spouse make a medical decision without a power of attorney? So, John, to make any type of medical decisions, you need to have a medical power of attorney. And there's 2 types of powers of attorney. There's a financial power of attorney, one for financial choices. Then there's also one for medical decision making. In Michigan, we call this a patient advocate designation. So, and in that patient advocate designation, otherwise called a medical power of attorney or advance directive, or sometimes called a living will, we need to have our decisions with regards to life support in that document. So you may have heard of Terry Schiavo. She was a woman down in Florida. She was in a vegetative state. Her husband wanted to remove her from life support. Her family wanted her to remain on life support. It became a big court battle that lasted over 8 years. Well, all of that could have been avoided had Terry Schiavo had a medical power of attorney in place, giving her husband either the authority or no authority to be able to make medical decisions, including removal from life support. So to answer your question, John, it does need to be in writing. So even if you're married, or you need to have your financial and medical power of attorney in place, appointing the spouse as, most likely appointing the spouse as the one to be able to make decisions. And a lot of times you might want to have the kids as the backup if something were to happen to the spouse. So hopefully that was helpful. Now we're going to get into our second question here, and this is from Gail. And Gail asks, when is a guardianship required? My father has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he's starting to forget some things. When do we need to take steps to become a guardian for him? Well, Gail, that's a tough question to answer, and it's going to be different for every family. But I think of guardianship really as kind of the last option. I would want to explore other options before we go the guardianship route. So with that guardianship, it really is the matter of last resort, because now you're getting into a court process. It's time consuming. There's additional costs, and you're taking control from the family and giving it to the courts. So ideally, what you'd first try to do is try to work with a financial power of attorney and a medical power of attorney. By having those in place, a lot of families can avoid the guardianship route. Now, he might have Alzheimer's, might be forgetting things, but he probably still has what's called lucid moments, so there still might be capacity to be able to sign those financial and medical powers of attorney. Because you could be appointed a financial power of attorney, and you'd be able to do a lot of things for Dad. So the first question is whether Dad has capacity, and it sounds like most likely he does. So he could execute new documents. So I'd recommend going the financial power of attorney route and guardianship, or financial power of attorney and medical power of attorney route versus going the guardianship route. Now, where you might want to go the guardianship route is if your father's making decisions that are contrary to his best interest. So maybe if he's fighting you on some of the decisions and the decisions are really for the best at Dad. So if he's harming himself or if he's giving away money, falling for a lot of scams, because your financial power of attorney doesn't take away Dad's ability to make his own decisions. That's really only through the guardianship. And that's why we call it a last resort option, because by going the guardianship route, now you've taken away Dad's independence. He has no authority, unless it's a limited guardianship. He has no authority to be able to make his own decisions. And it's a kind of a messy court process sometimes, because now the courts are going to appoint a guardian ad litem who's going to review the medical file, talk to Dad, interview you. Your dad would be entitled to an attorney himself, potentially, so if he were to fight it. So if possible, Gail, try to avoid that guardianship. See if you can get through with just the powers of attorney. Much quicker, much cheaper, much less intrusive than that guardianship route. Next question is from Helena. I think my father may have Alzheimer's. What do I do? One of the things I would do is for sure visit, maybe get him checked out at a doctor. And there's geriatric doctors out there. But also one of the things you could do is you could always reach out to the Alzheimer's Association. They have an 800 number that will make sure that we put into the show notes. But you could always reach out to the Alzheimer's Association because they have a lot of resources available, and they'd be able to direct you as to what might be the next steps. But for sure, I would look at maybe getting a doctor involved and then reaching out to the Alzheimer's Association. So next question is from Sarah. So Sarah asks, what are the care options for my mother with Alzheimer's? Sarah's mom's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, unable to care for herself at this point, can't be at home anymore. So this is where we get into the elder care journey. And a lot of times we might work with a geriatric social worker or care manager to help identify the best location. Because just because you have an Alzheimer's diagnosis, there's a lot of kind of different options in terms of care, and there's a wide spectrum of what level of care is necessary. Like, for example, do they need help with a lot of the activities of daily living, or they can still manage all of the activities of daily living? And activities of daily living, or ADLs, think of it as the first 6 things you do when you get up in the morning. So you transition out of bed, you go to the bathroom, maybe you shower, you get dressed, you prepare a meal, you take your medications. So those are the big, the 6 ADLs. And typically you need 2 of those to qualify for any type of long-term care insurance. But if your mom's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the key is to understand, like, what does she need assistance with? What are the activities of daily living that she needs assistance with? And then you have some options. And option 1 might be keeping mom at home and bringing in home care. That might run you $1,000 to $3,000 a month if you're buying a couple hours per day, a couple times per week. Generally, home care costs about $20 to $25 an hour. Then you might get to the point where home care doesn't make sense anymore, and you need to look at independent or assisted living. And here the lines are starting to gray a lot, where the independent living communities are bringing in home care providers to kind of match what the assisted living is able to provide. But think of this as more of a hotel or apartment type environment with additional services available. They're going to prepare meals, do laundry. After a long day at work, sometimes I wish I lived in an assisted living because to take care of everything for me, I just have to worry about where I'm going to play euchre. So assisted living, typically that's going to run you anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 a month. Think of the Brookdales, the Sunrises, the American Houses, that type of environment. And then we might get to the point where even assisted living isn't enough, and we need assisted living with memory care, which is more of like a protective environment. There's additional services available, more geared towards Alzheimer's and dementia. Some examples of that would be things like Arden Court. Sunrise has some memory care communities as well. Ashley Court, I think, is another example. And these are typically going to be anywhere from like $5,000 to $8,000 a month. And then the final step is nursing home care. So nursing home care, that's more of a hospital type environment, more of a bed situation versus walking around. That's typically going to be $8,000 to $12,000 a month. And now 1 in 2 people are going to set foot in a nursing home. And 3 out of 4 are going to need some form of long-term care. And then that's where we get into the question of how are we going to go about paying for it. And we've talked about it, but we have 6 ways to pay for long-term care. And I'm not going to belabor it here, but we can either private pay, we can have the kids pay, we can utilize long-term care insurance, Medicare pays for short-term rehab, maybe the VA benefit could take care of it, but we have some big changes coming with the VA benefit, which I think we'll talk about maybe more on the next show. But then if the last option is Medicaid. And so Medicaid can pay for the nursing home costs, but Medicaid's not going to pay for home care or assisted living. So the first step is to identify kind of what level of care mom needs, and then figure out from there how we're going to go about paying for it. So something to think about. So let's get into our next question here. If 4 adult siblings inherit an equal amount of an estate, but one of the 4 passes away, does his portion of the estate go to the rest of the siblings or to his children? So this is from Sam. So Sam asks, if 4 siblings inherit equal amount of an estate, but one of the 4 passes away, does his portion of his estate go to the rest of the siblings or to his children? So what Sam is asking here is about joint ownership. And if you remember in our last segment, we talked about different ways of owning property, whether it's transitioning property upon death, whether it's through beneficiary designations or joint ownership. So Sam's asking about joint ownership. So we have 4 siblings, all named to an estate. Who inherits what if one of them passes away? Well, really, there's kind of 2 options. And the 2 options would be, first, it flows down the bloodline. So we call this per stirpes. So if one of the 4 siblings passes away, their share would go to their children. So let's say 4 siblings, let's say daughter passes away or sister passes away, and let's say sister has 2 children, her 1/4 share would now go to those 2 children. And that's the more common way we see things set up in an estate plan, whether a will or trust, is this per stirpes language. Basically, the money flows down the bloodline. The other option, and this is typically what we see on things like real estate, would be that it's joint ownership. Joint ownership might be, so what I just described could be also tenants in common if we had it on a piece of real estate, where basically each share flows down the bloodline. Now, if it was on a piece of real estate, then it would end up going into probate, which is not what we want to do. The other option with real estate would be joint ownership with right of survivorship. So in that situation, if you had 4 adult siblings and one of the siblings were to pass away, so let's say sister passed away, her share, instead of going down to maybe her children or her estate, would now go to her siblings. So that 1/4 share, instead of it going down to her children or her estate, would now be split up amongst the remaining 3 survivors. Where this really becomes an issue is we see it with real estate. A lot of people assume that it's going to be joint ownership with right or survivorship, but what happens is that, let's say there's 4 kids named on a deed, and it doesn't say joint ownership with right or survivorship, then what's going to happen is that share, that deceased individual's share ends up going into probate versus going to the other siblings. So with real estate, typically we see it that way, and you have to have that joint ownership with right or survivorship language on the deed if that's the goal with a real estate. But if we're talking about wills and trusts, typically it is that per stirpes where it flows down the bloodline. So hopefully that was helpful. Need a little bit more information on what exactly makes up that estate, Sam, to help you, but hopefully that was helpful. So this next question, this is from Chad. So what makes up my estate? Who needs estate planning? What makes a well-designed estate plan? If I have a living trust, do I need a will? So there's a lot to that, but an estate would be really your assets, and it's just a matter of how we want to plan your estate. And there's a lot that goes into whether you need a will or a trust, but everyone needs to think about how assets would get out of their name if they were to pass away. And that's really what estate planning is all about. Estate planning, it's avoiding probate, controlling that distribution, making sure stuff goes where you want it to go, and then also what happens if you don't pass away, continue living, you face all the issues that go along with living. So without knowing more, I can't tell you whether you need a will or a trust, because it really boils down to what are your goals. And without knowing your goals, I can't really advise you on the best route with regards to your legal plan or any other type of planning. We always start with goals. And that's why we need to avoid that procrastination like we talked about in our last segment. We need to have some type of plan. We need to have our financial plan, our tax plan, our estate plan all in order, because we never know when we're going to need it. And without a plan, we're not going to know where we want to go. So that's it for the questions this week. Join us next week. Next week, I'm going to talk at least a little bit about this new VA change. So if you're a veteran or surviving spouse of a veteran, things are changing with regards to your benefits. So stick with us next week as we get into more of that. And if you do have questions or want to attend one of our workshops, give us a call anytime at 810-355-2584. Remember, now's the last time to donate to the Alzheimer's Association. So please join us and make it a great week. This has been Chris Berry. Thank you.
Learn more about Chris Berry and the Elder Care Firm by visiting online at MichiganEstatePlanning.com. That's MichiganEstatePlanning.com. You can also call Chris Berry at 888-390-4360. 888-390-4360. This program content reflects the opinions of Chris Berry and his guests, not the Elder Care Firm, Prosperity Capital Advisors, or the C.J. Berry Group, and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment or legal advice or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security or to follow any legal or tax strategy. There's no guarantee that the strategist's statements, opinions, or forecast provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses, which would reduce returns. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There's no guarantee that any investment plan or strategy will be successful. We recommend that you consult with a professional dedicated to your needs. This program is furnished by the Elder Care Firm.